I welcome you this day, the 27th of August, 2025. Thank you so much for coming to the Feminized Corruption Research Group. This is our second meeting, and we are grateful that we are able to continue with the conversations and the kinds of work that we intend to do. We all are here because we agreed to be here to work together. And so I want to thank everyone once again for our time. I want to, without wasting time, let us go into the conversation for today. We have the conversation around gender and whistleblowing presentation. That's what we're expecting to discuss today. The reason why we have chosen to discuss whistleblowing is because the whole concept of feminized corruption um, revolves around several things. So, depending on what chapter you are writing and how you want to approach what you are doing, you probably will still have something to do with whistleblowing. And when we say that, we mean that there could be instances where women are trailed or with some kind of scandal or backlash that are corruption related, probably because they are whistleblowers or probably because they refused to conform with the status quo of corruption, which has, dominated many of our spaces. And unfortunately, many of those spaces are also masculinized spaces. So we saw that the work that Dr. Garrick is doing around whistleblowing is an important one. And we would like her to share with us both from our experience in the United States and, of course, the short time she had spent working in South Africa. So, without wasting time, this today, I just want to hand it over to Dr. Jacqueline Garrick to begin to speak with us. Please keep your questions, your comments, and your contributions. We'll come back to them. Over to you, Dr. Garrick. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon, so much for inviting me to be a part of this group. I'm obviously in the US. I've spent only a limited amount of time in Africa. I'm working on my chapter interview style so that in the voices of some of the women that I met in South Africa. Some of those stories I think are impacting. I story of Babita Deokaran has meant so much to the women of South Africa. She was the health department whistleblower who was murdered outside of her home in relation to her whistleblowing, and that story a very long time. And then I do believe they finally caught and prosecuted some of those men. A slide deck. I see. Let's see. Okay. I'm assuming, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, good. There's so many things open. I'm trying to, oh, here, down here on Zoom. Oh, well, I just tried to go full screen and now it went blank. No, it's just taking forever to load. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, all right. I will have to keep clicking it. All right. Well, so what I wanted to share a little bit about today was over the course of the last couple of months, we did run a survey on whistleblowers. We had about 300 people respond to our request for a survey. And we were mostly focused on the mental health or the psychosocial issues that we thought were the most important. And we'll try to highlight some of the issues, especially as they related to women we're still sort of digesting some of this information, but I think it's important to just start by beginning to look at some of the data. So when we did this by mailing out through email and social media, so it was pretty much a self-selecting sample who responded and who identified as, and then we were excited that we got 330 responses from people in 31 countries. And again, because of my connection to South Africa, it was South Africa where we had responses outside of US, UK, and Australia were the countries that had the most responses. So some of our key findings were related to education and class. We found 9% of the respondents held advanced degrees, and that somebody wants to be, and that let me see, you've got people wanting to be admitted. And that 41% identified as middle class. But after whistleblowing, that population, the employability or the employment rate really dropped significantly, so that less than half of the respondents were back to being full-time gainfully employed. So we also had primarily women who responded to the survey, and that may be overly statistically significant because it was about I think 10 or 12 more women who responded to the survey, but we thought that that was interesting. And from other data that we've seen, that women tend to be whistleblowers more in the healthcare sector and men more in the financial or bank. So we saw some differences well. So, and then of course, a lot of government related whistleblowing, especially among US respondents. And we include things like discrimination, harassment, bullying as whistleblowing, as opposed to just things like financial fraud, waste, and abuse. So our definition might be a little broader than others. Every country has different laws, and when we put together the survey, we were trying to be sensitive to the fact that we were going to be global in our going out with the survey, because we were also trying to show that has a psychosocial impact, mental health or resilience impact that's to human nature than individual countries where whistleblowing occurs and where reaching occurs. Okay, what's going on? Oh, okay. So the types of discrimination or retaliation, we found an interesting correlation to discrimination and retaliation. So it really went along age, race, disability, gender, and orientation. And we're sort of shortcutting orientation as to be the LGBTQ population, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender population. So we just say orientation to simplify. And they were reporting things like harassment, mobbing, gaslighting, shunning, humiliation, blacklisting, and termination were some of the facets of retaliation. One of the things we thought was really interesting, because we talk so much about protections and that whistleblowers and especially employees should have rights when they make disclosures. And most countries that respond, most people who responded were from countries where there was whistleblower protection, but nearly half were unaware of whistleblower protections in their country. So we kind of see that as a gap. It's one thing for there to be whistleblower protections. There's another thing for people to be aware of those protections. And then, even among those who were aware, so like half of that population, those who did seek help and consult authorities, most did not. So we were seeing some of this as some real gaps in here's the law, here's what people know about the law, here's who used the law, and then if they used the law, how satisfied were they? And that 2.6 out of 10 to us was a real indication that they were extremely bad when they did use the law. So were you aware of the risks? While some understood that there were risks to whistleblowing, the risk being retaliation, more than half did not really anticipate that there would be retaliation. And then most who suffered consequences of the retaliation, most who were having issues, they were dealing with the intrusive thoughts, sleeplessness. Oh, I went back by mistake, sorry. The loss of faith in the justice system, the strain on their families. Those were some of the things we found to be the most interesting. And then the most common diagnosis pre and post whistleblowing. So there was very low diagnoses pre-whistleblowing, with the exception of PTSD. That was probably the highest. Depression and then anxiety, and about half endorsed post whistleblowing, endorsed some suicidal ideations and issues related to that. Um, um, and then the idea that so many people were feeling think was some with then also fluctuating between countries as well. So that would be these indicators worthy of unpacking further than what we're seeing now. Other things that we saw kind of hold steady were things like neurodiversity, being on the autism spectrum. There's been some research about that. Are whistleblowers neurodivergent? Do they get stuck? Is it hard to hear no? Do they become hyper-focused on what they think? We didn't see too much of a variation in that, but then we also know that neurodiversity is not well understood by a lot of people. In fact, we just did last month back in July, we did a special session on neurodiversity and whistleblowing, trying to unpack that bit more. We did not see a lot of substance abuse, which we might have expected, or people self-medicating. Did not see a big jump in that, but what we did see is disorder, sort of a jump in that, and that would be, I think, another one of those things that would be interesting to unpack. If we have more women who are whistleblowing, is eating disorders, is that something that would be more common among a female population than a male population? So one of those other facets that I think we want to look at in the future as well. Did I miss? No. Okay, this is kind of bouncing around. Okay, so I think over the long term, life after whistleblowing, which we were very interested in, was the number of people who were facing chronic unemployment. And um, so we have also seen some association with, and especially if diagnosed with PTSD and depression, that going hand in hand with that is a lot of autoimmune diseases like lupus, MS, neurological headaches, musculoskeletal, so a lot of joint pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, ulcers, um, as well as some cancers are associated with stress-related conditions. So we knew physical health can also very much be impacted by that. And I could certainly draw from whistleblower after whistleblower the stories of, well, I had to put a hold on my case because I ended up in the hospital. I had a heart attack. I had a nervous breakdown, or somebody in my family got really sick. I've had cancer, all because of how it relates to this case. So those are definitely issues I think we're really mindful of, as well as the family discord issue, that it either brings families together and they bond and they fight this much stronger together, or it really disintegrates the family. And there are some roles reversing. So if the husband was the whistleblower and now the wife is having to become the main breadwinner, or the wife is the whistleblower and the husband really feels like he can't help or protect or defend, or there's like these jealousies, oh, you're more interested in your case than you are to me. That's where we see some of them. And we've seen that whistleblower. We've seen what they call parent alienation syndrome, where children disassociate themselves from their parents. One, they don't want to be associated with the case, or where they go the other way and they really become part of the active whistleblowing. So they begin to work with the parent on the whistleblowing. Son, um, dad has aged, and now the son, who is an adult, he's whistleblower case alongside his dad. And I spoke to another woman whose dad has long since died, and she's still working to clear his name and wants him recognized to be a hero. So there are all these intergenerational transmissions of trauma as well that I see that go hand in hand with the whistleblowing. Again, this was some of the demographic information. I think I covered some of this already. The majority of respondents were married, some were divorced, most were living with spouses or children. This age range was really interesting. Again, I don't know how well to trust this, but ages 27 to 94 responded to our survey, with most of the ages being what we would have expected. I think it was between age 45 and 60, which would be, working age adults. The middle class, advanced degrees, more females. Majority of our respondents were white, and that's reflective, I'm guessing, of the US. US, North America, so US, Canada, Europe, and Australia, I think, were our primary areas where we did get respondents from. But as I mentioned, globally we got respondents, so that was quite exciting. Another interesting facet was that 69% of the whistleblowers endorsed a faith-based practice, but only 16% reported taking their case or talking about their case or getting support from a member of the clergy. And so again, that's where we saw this gap, that maybe we need to do more training with the faith-based community to help understand the the whistleblowing and this idea of social justice, restorative justice, these issues that focus around their community that would make people become whistleblowers. And then the other thing we found interesting was that 40% reported having a disability. And so those health issues, again, were something more that we thought we might want to look into and unpack further in the future. So some of our key findings, our takeaways, and again, this was part of our theory in the first place. Retaliation has devastating personal, professional, and mental health consequences. People felt unprotected and and unsupported, found little to no justice going forward. However, despite some of those hardships, connecting with other whistleblowers was a key factor in building resilience, and that protections needed better enforcement and support throughout, which is what Whistleblowers of America does. We're from all over the world gravitate to us because we're not lawyers, we're not journalists. We're really here to help you unpack your story, validate your experience, and feeling good about what you did and that you did the best that you could given your circumstances. And then these are the things that we were recommendations. Um, the educational or socioeconomic backgrounds, like I said earlier, a lot of our supposition is that women are more in the healthcare space whistleblowing, that there are issues that are more female dominated, like sexual assault, sextortion, sexual harassment. Those might be more gender related types of issues that we would want to look at. And then are aware of protections. How could we get them to better outcomes? Retaliation, does it differ? Different industries and demographics. In countries like the US, we're not very homogeneous, or there's a caste system in many countries, race and gender. How significant are those factors when we start at understanding, and are people going to be retaliated against differently? You know, are men retaliated against than women? And like that. And then I think one of the things we've been trying to unpack is what is the pro whistleblowing versus, you know, the see it but do nothing about it. And kind of closed in somewhat on whistleblowing and trauma and moral injury, neurodivergency, and this faith-based propensity. But again, that's something I think we need to do more research on. This effect on your mental health and physical health over time. So if we did time and motion studies, you know, so how is a year one versus, and then what kind of supports are they using and what do they really need? We're big proponents of the peer support, ombuds, legal, mental health, what the clergy, really, I think, focusing in on some of those issues as well. The idea about law enforcement and those associations, the family implications, how are families impacted? How do we help families stay together during this kind of case? What makes whistleblowing worth it? Accountability for the wrongdoing. We've had lots of discussion about the criminalization of retaliation. So the corruption itself might be a crime. Money laundering is a crime, but if I retaliate against you for reporting my money laundering, is that a different kind of an offense that should result in criminal charges as well as some of these other types of damages? And again, that goes along with policies that can improve the protections and the reduction of retaliation. And then the presence of support, how important is that? This idea of damages and assessing for damages. So if I retaliate against you, I cause you to have PTSD or depression, am I as equally liable as if you worked in a factory and you lost your arm in machinery and now I had to compensate you for your loss of arm? Am I as equally liable to compensate you if I've retaliated against you and I've caused an impact to your mental health? And then, of course, integrating a trauma-informed perspective into some of these legal services, I think would be an important step as well for future study. And so this is kind of what we plan to do with the data, more comparative analysis, statistical correlations. How does the data inform policy and advocacy? How do we raise more public awareness and education around, here are your rights as whistleblowers, informing the clergy, some of those other things that I mentioned? What kind of publications and academic reviews do we need? Types of papers, books, like what we're doing here with these chapters, legislative, and this idea, my personal is on the standardization for damages for psychological abuse. So I tried to do that as quick as I could. I hope I was brief enough. That's our website, Whistleblowers of America. This is our conference. We're going to try to also have a virtual component to the Workplace Promise Institute. We do monthly roundtables, which you can find at our whistleblowersofamerica.org. We have a YouTube channel that we're trying to build our subscribers for. So that's where you can find all of our videos, and everything we post is on the Whistleblowers of America YouTube channel that is at the bottom of our website homepage. You have to just scroll down and look for the icon, and then you can follow us. And of course, if you have any other questions for me that we don't get to today, that is my email address.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garrick. Thank you so much. I will not waste time because I think we still have a lot to engage with from where you stopped. I've noted a couple of things that you mentioned, and I am having a feeling that some of the things that you have discussed have their connections. For those who are listening keenly to these, will have been seeing the connections with some of the works that we are doing. And I wanted to ask initially about the gender of the whistleblowers. And you did mention that there are more women than men. It's fascinating to see
Well,
that.
that responded to this survey. I don't want to, I don't know that we know like by country or overall, but who responded to this survey, we had out of our 330 respondents, about 12 more were female.
Mm, okay.
So I don't know how reflective that is. I don't want to generalize.
Okay, okay, that's clear. All right. So, and the fact that you also mentioned that more women were within the health sector, uh, and then the men maybe some financial issues and like that. I wanted to ask, why do you think people blow the whistle? Maybe you want to put down some of my questions because I will ask like three or four, and then I will let you respond to them. So the first one is about why you think people blow the whistle. So in the case of my research, I will use that as my example. I have seen women who do not conform with what the men in a particular space, specifically in politics, the men say we're going to do it this way, and the women, the little number of women in the space say no, we're not doing it that way because that is not sensitive to the populace, and it becomes a problem. And when that happens, it leads always to that retaliation that you are talking about. And that is one context of feminized corruption that we are looking at, even though there are several. So I wanted to find out, why do you think people blow the whistle? That's the first one. The second one, I wanted you to tell us your own story. I mean, you have a very interesting story. Briefly, tell us your story and how you got into the Whistleblowing of America organization, and how that all of that started. I think I should let you respond to those two, and then we can pick the other questions. Please, members of the group, prepare your questions, and you may also want to drop them in the chat box. So let's go. Over to you.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So two really, I guess, important questions. Sometimes I forget to introduce myself a little better. And because I get so excited about the data and the topic. So let me start by doing a little bit of that. So I was a U.S. Army social work officer. I'm a social worker by background. So this has really been sort of a career pathway for me, understanding mental health and trauma and working with military populations for the better part of the last 40 years. I hate to admit that, but it's been a long career. And seeing some of the universal responses of trauma, right? We know that PTSD doesn't just happen in America, it happens to troops all over the world, which was kind of my parlay into thinking, well, if PTSD is a human response to adverse events, then do we understand retaliation as trauma, which I don't think we do a really good job about even understanding retaliation as trauma because of, I mean, in the US, we primarily use the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I think in most other countries, you're working through the World Health Organization, the ICD codes, the International Classifications for Diseases. Um, and they have a little bit different definitions of trauma. Some of the criteria is the same, but it's key that the definition is different. And the WHO definition is a little broader than the APA definition. So I think that's an interesting element that we contend with is, do we even agree that retaliation or psychological abuse, discrimination, oppression, that those type of activities. Well, so, when I've done court testimony, I've been asked, so was the person, punched, slapped, kicked? No, so it can't be PTSD. We know that that's not necessarily the case, that being emotionally abused, harassed, denigrated, humiliated, belittled can be traumatizing. It's convincing, I think, some of the powers that be. And that's why when I talk about a trauma-informed perspective for the law, I think this is an important component of that. So that's kind of how I got started, was understanding trauma and then applying it to whistleblowing. When I went through my own experience at the Pentagon on our Defense Suicide Prevention Office funding, I made a disclosure, and instead of being believed and accepted, and I certainly thought, well, for sure somebody will put an end to this, deal with it, and all will be right with the world. So that kind of leads me into your first question, which was why whistleblowing. And I think the data that we saw about education and socioeconomic status, to me, that speaks to profession, right? So if you've got a lot of women who are nurses, doctors, social workers, and they're working in the health profession, they have this professional code of ethics. And when they see something wrong, they have a code of ethics that pretty much tells them what is right and what is wrong. What is a standard of care? And if a standard of care is being violated or goes against what should be a norm, like you were saying, the women in the community, if they see something as unrealistic or impractical and they speak out, and then they, instead of, the powers that be saying, oh, well, thank you for telling us it's broken, let's get right to fixing it. And they say, you didn't see anything and you should shut your mouth, and you're taken aback by that. No, 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 you must have misunderstood me, right? Something's broken and we should fix it. The water in town is being contaminated, or the healthcare is substandard, or children are being abused. Whatever people report, very often what informs their thinking is their professionalism. And I think that's an important aspect of this. That's why we were very interested to see that most of our whistleblowers had advanced degrees, professionals, a higher socioeconomic status and age kind of correlate. Hey, I've been at this a long time. I have experience. I have this lived experience that tells me, I've been a social worker for X number of years. That's not how you do this. And and I think that those become some of those important factors as to why people whistleblow.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions are already coming in, but I also admire the work that you have done and that you have presented to us, especially considering the climate, the political climate of the US at this point in time. I'm sure it's even worse to be a whistleblower now than it used to be. We don't want to go into all of that because we see the backlash with our researchers,
We were
our
just having
colleagues,
that conversation. Yeah,
yeah, across
yeah,
the spaces, the funding court, the backlash against universities and researchers, and all of that. So it's a lot, and for anybody to raise any eyebrow now, people will just say, even the government will just, so you can have the retaliation from different angles. But somebody is asking that how do we know the integrity of the whistleblowing or of whistleblowing or the whistleblower? How is the populace so sure it isn't just a hoax? I won't
yeah.
talk about that. So I'll leave you
No,
to do justice to that.
no, that's a really good question, and it's a fair question. Of the whistleblower matter. Um, and I think, in the UN resolution on whistleblowing, they talk about, a good faith disclosure. Um, and sometimes whistleblowers will and say, hmm, I've been doing this work and I don't think, what I'm doing is laundering money. Like sometimes they don't even know.
Mm.
Or they recognize that, law enforcement might be closing in on them. So they try to get ahead of it and make a disclosure. Or, we've had people who have made disclosures um, where we've said, are they really just trying to get out of trouble? Usually what we see with whistleblowing is there's a timeline that's pretty consistent. So something bad happens, becomes aware of it, they make a disclosure, and then there's retaliation. Rarely is somebody who's already in trouble, right? So they've already been written up for poor performance, and now they blow the whistle on corruption, and they say, "Oh, you knew I was going to do." You're saying I'm a poor performer. Those get to be the cases that are harder to tease out because obviously there are good employee disclosures. I've made this little table: good employees, good disclosures; bad employees, bad disclosures. good employees, bad disclosures, bad disclosures, good employees. So multiple things could be true at the same time. It gets harder to tease that out. We all want these nice, clean cases, but let's face it, we're all human beings. The perfect life or the perfect background. There could be, you could have a bad employee with a good disclosure and that be true. Um, we're having that conversation this morning. And what do you do with a guy? So maybe he's a racist, and he's treated people really badly, but he's made a disclosure about corruption that he's 100% right about. The two things might be separate. You still might want to fire him because he's a racist and he's really toxic to your corporate culture, but you can't fire him because he's made a disclosure about money laundering. You have to separate out those issues and treat them separately. And that's not always easy to do. It's not always obvious either. It's the chicken and the egg, which came first.
Absolutely. So I was also going to ask about how this connects with feminized corruption. I see some key points. You talked about decline. People who you know that they know something just to refuse to say something because they don't want to be in trouble. And then you find those who put up the courage to speak out, having to face all kinds of backlash based on that. And that retaliation could come in different forms, including mobbing, and that's interesting. So I imagine that there's the physical mobbing, and then there is probably the emotional mobbing, and all kinds of players, walking around all those issues. There is also the part that interests me about you having to choose within your family system whether you are fighting this together or that becomes a problem, a basis for division within the family. So again, it tells that to be a whistleblower, you need some certain support, maybe from the home front, maybe from your circle of your sphere of influence, and so on and so forth, which of course in many cases women don't get, which is again that part of on solidarity that we look at feminist solidarity. How far can it go? With a whistleblower who is saying, oh, this person is harassing me, and the women in the space are saying, but you're not the only woman in this space. Why are you complaining? But this has always been. So why are you overly, disturbed about this? So that makes it often difficult. We are watching the time, and I want to quickly go to the question. Somebody's saying, Ibrahim is saying, what roles do institutions play in whistleblowing? To a large extent, do they have political underpinnings as other sensitive issues, especially in the USA? Let me see another one. How would you suggest whistleblowing should be handled in the academics? Oh, ooh, well, I don't know. Okay, there is this one that says whistleblowing in the political sector in Nigeria can be deadly. And they're giving examples. There have been people who blew the whistle, Ken Saro-Wiwa, Delegiwa, they were killed, and you have mentioned the issue of retaliation. I'm not sure that's a question. So, given that corruption disproportionately affects women, what unique gender-specific challenges do female whistleblowers face? And how do societal biases impact their credibility and the effectiveness of their report? I think to you, Emmanuel, some of the materials that we have shared actually gives answer to your questions. These women often are isolated. They are taken into the private space and they never show up in the public again, and so on and so on. And then Dr. Garrick has also mentioned some of them. Mary Bekurere is saying, I have just concluded the study with CSO leaders in Uganda. A number of them have reported insecurity that ranges from non-renewal of licenses to intimidation, deaths. Wow. So you have
Mhm.
one major question, two, maybe two. One is about the academia, and the other one is the role of institutions. in whistleblowing? Over to you.
Yes, I think those questions kind of go hand in hand because I think this all starts with organizational culture that organizations that tolerate, cover up, have toxic leaders. I mean, those are the ones where retaliation and discrimination, harassment, where those things thrive. And that could happen as much in the US as it does in Uganda or Nigeria. It's what does the culture tolerate? And if the culture doesn't tolerate retaliation and you value your free speech and your speak up rights and you believe in this idea that everybody has a right to be heard, even if you don't agree with that, what they have to say, but you have to have that willingness to listen. And I think the academia that should be the home of a lot of this research needs to I think really fund and focus on these emotional abuse issues as trauma, and we need to build better understandings of just what is emotional abuse, how to create organizational safe spaces, to create safe speak up cultures. Academia would be leading the way on this. And I know it's just as competitive, maybe even more so than other places. Academic whistleblowers who have who have a case here where she died by suicide um, after making a disclosure and then being so horribly mistreated. So, I mean, I think there's definitely more work to do in this space. I mean, I think even just defining who and what is a whistleblower. We do it very much from an employment perspective, just because we're a small organization. That's what the most of the US laws focus on is retaliation being employment related, being terminated, demoted. But obviously, in the speaking truth to power, um, is bigger than just employment. There are a lot of, and especially now we're living in a world where it's very political. Speaking out against the government can get you killed or disappeared. It's a dangerous environment all over the world, maybe for different reasons, and maybe for some very corrupt people. Corrupt people want to stay corrupt, and they don't fight on what they're doing wrong. And women tend to be the most vulnerable in every society. Um, right now, we have no female members of Congress, or in committees. There are none. When at one point, standing behind the president was two women. Now there are no women at all. And the ones that are in leadership right now in the US, they've had to pledge a certain amount of loyalty to get to be in those positions. And when we value the loyalties over the truths, that's where we see corruption and democracy. Long answer, I guess, maybe. Complicated.
Thank you so much. I like the
Um,
last part, okay, of the statement you made. Corruption of democracy is when we value loyalty over, uh, what did you call it now? Loyalty
over the
over
truth,
the truth. Yeah. So,
over speaking the truth, or just being able to speak. Even if I'm wrong, I should be able to have a voice.
mm, mm. Thank you so much. Apart from the support whistleblowers can get from families, are there support groups for them? I see that Prof is doing something like that in America and with our organization, with Whistleblowers of America. Do we have such organizations in Africa or maybe Nigeria? Oh, I don't know of too many across Africa. There are definitely organizations that are working around people who are whistleblowers to protect them. and they protect them from different angles. So we have a few around, and then there have been trainings also and workshops around whistleblowing and corruption in
Yeah.
I
I've
mean,
been invited, but I've spoken at some of their events, I think. And Afra Afric Mill, it's a
yeah,
long acronym for
yeah,
um with Cheeto,
Onoma,
I'm not remembering, and Goodwin.
Chido Onoma.
Yes. Oh, yes, Onuma. Um, and then of course in South Africa, I think they're just in South Africa, is the Whistleblower House. Um, and I'd have to think about some others that might be more specific. And I know some African countries, the African Union has done some work on whistleblowing laws. Is it Rwanda? I think has its whistleblower laws. I'm trying to remember. I know there were a couple of African countries, maybe it was Nigeria, South Africa, obviously, even though they're horribly ineffective.
Mm.
There are definitely African countries with whistleblower protection laws. Um, but I mean, just as sort of the outsider looking in, I mean, I think where the European Union has had a pretty strong directive, I don't know that if the African Union has been as strongly organized, and maybe the UNCAC and the UN resolution on reporting persons can become at least a pole in the tent. Like this should be our basics of what we consider whistleblower laws and protection. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah, and that's why when I talk about enforcement, it's one thing to have laws, but if they're paper tigers, they have no real, it's they're just niceties to have, but then they need protections. If you don't have any, you at least need to benchmark those policies in paper, and so that there's a framework, an understanding, a strategy that everybody understands.
mm. Thank you very much. There are other conversations going on in the chat box. We may not be able to go through all of them because it's 8 o'clock already. We started slightly 5 minutes behind schedule, and we should be preparing to close now because people have other things to do. So I see the question from Omotola talking about the police, not typically the first point of contact for whistleblowers. Well, where do you start from as a whistleblower? I think that's an important question among many others. I mean, how do you start to raise your hands and say, no, there is a foul play here? To the police, to the press, where do you turn to? I think it's an important question which we need to quickly address.
So I think most whistleblowers don't start out thinking, oh, I'm blowing the whistle. They start out by thinking, oh, there's something wrong and I should next that I think responsible. And again, in the workplace, you usually go to your boss or your supervisor, and that's the person you think will help you the most. And then when they don't help you, you go to the next person, the next person. So we often see whistleblowing very much internal inside an organization. And then when they're denied, gaslit, told they're crazy, mobbed, shunned, that's when they start to go to external sources. In whatever country you're in, the best thing to do is have a strategy, think this through, investigate what the rules are, know what the law is, who's on your team, your family, an attorney, medical, like who can you rely on, your clergy member, other NGOs, who can you go to for help? Build the strategy before stepping off the dock and whistleblowing so that you have a support system around you and you're more knowledgeable about the law. I know it doesn't always happen that way because most whistleblowers, I think, are accidental whistleblowers.
Mm, thank you. I think some of us, to that end, some of us are actually part of the support system for whistleblowers, as much as some of us are also whistleblowers, especially for those of us who are writing around some of these things. We will be calling attention to hidden things or things that are not, the popular set of research or studies that people do. And so it's important for us to keep this in mind, this whole conversation around whistleblowing. There's a lot that we can talk about when it comes to whistleblowing, especially in this age of AI, and how truthful our evidences and so on can be. Oh, I recorded it. Oh, and how can we be sure that this is true or this is not true? Or, how people deny evidences and so on and so forth. There's a lot that we can still talk about. But we are looking forward to other times when we can still engage further. Good enough we're from different parts of Africa, and this excites me a lot because I see that we are going to be able to do a lot and cover a lot, with this project that we are doing. Like we mentioned, that things would come up in the course of this project. One of it is the United Nations Office on Drug and Crimes 11th session conference on the state parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. That, I think, because I have several UN events,
Mhm.
I mixed it up. It's not October, it's December, December 15 to 19. That's when
December.
it's
Mhm.
holding. And that will be holding in Qatar, Doha. We are
Did
applying,
a Yeah.
sorry? Yeah, go ahead.
No, and I submitted a proposal on whistleblowing for
Okay.
a civil society session. So look for if I get it, I'll go. If I don't get it, I don't know that I'll go all the way to Doha, Qatar.
Yeah, if I get it also, I'll go and we'll make it hybrid so we can bring our colleagues from this space to also come and speak to feminized corruption. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming, everyone. Colleagues, we appreciate you. Um, and please, we're going to share resources. Like I said earlier, we have a Google Drive. If you also find any material that you think will be useful, you can drop them in the Google Drive for people to access, especially so that we can have connections with things that are happening in our other countries. So if you have papers that are connected with what we are doing, you can put them in the Google Drive. Once again, I want to wish you a wonderful day. It's an evening here, wonderful evening to the Nigerians and those who are within this time zone, and a good day to the rest of us. Let's enjoy the rest of the month, and I pray that the new month will also be a wonderful one. Thank you for coming, and God bless you.